welcome to Pandemic R7. As you know, this is a series of podcasts looking at the impact of the COVID-19 pandemic on communications, on health policy, and on the world around us. And I'm joined by a great panel this week to look at the very question of health communications, what's changed, what's been good, and what's been particularly bad. I'm joined by Eric from Washington, D.C., who's the editor of the Economic Standard, a freelance writer, and he's a popular historian too. He wrote 101 facts you don't know about the First World War, but couldn't really have foreseen how topical that would be in the light of the 1918 flu. So welcome, Eric. Marta is joining us from Sao Paulo. Marta is the founder of Fundamento, a communications group. She's one of the shareholders in Baird CMC. She's a former BBC journalist and a well-known figure in the Brazilian communications scene. So, bem-vindo, Marta. With me here in Wales, although originally from Spain and a keen observer of Spanish media, is Raquel. Raquel is a part of our Baird CMC group. She has a master's in journalism from Cardiff University, and she's a former radio producer with Gestión Radio in Madrid, and she keeps a keen eye on the Spanish media scene. And then in Delhi, Aman Gupta, another of our Baird CMC shareholders, the founder of SPAG, and a frequent editorial contributor in India, his most recent piece on global harmonization of medical policies. So it's great to have you all with us, and thank you again for joining us. I wanted to start out thinking about particularly good and particularly bad examples we've seen of responsible reporting throughout the pandemic, of things that made you proud of a background in journalism and things that made you cringe?
As far as the reporting, I will be perfectly honest, I haven't seen anything that made me proud. I've only seen things that made me cringe. I don't think it's entirely the fault of the reporters. It's obvious that they're working with a very difficult situation. The last month in this country is an interesting example, the controversy over masks. Early on, we were told don't wear masks, and the reporting was pretty consistent, and the advice was pretty consistent too. Then it switched, and this is not just the reporters' fault. It's also the authorities. The CDC changed its advice last month to wear the mask. The problem is that they had been telling everyone that mask didn't work. Then they said suddenly, yes, okay, you should wear a mask. That immediately makes people suspicious and distrusting, and it's damage that's very hard to repair. And they could have tried to explain it. The argument over hydroxychloroquine or chloroquine as a treatment for COVID, in this country at least, it became highly politicized because Donald Trump mentioned it on March 19th. And as soon as Trump mentioned it, it became, hydroxychloroquine is evil, it's untested, it's unproven. And it is true, it's untested and unproven, but not a single reporter in this country has reported the fact that, for example, it's widely used in the rest of the world right now to combat coronavirus, that is used in South Korea, Italy, Spain, countries with first-class medical systems. I haven't seen a single mention of it. It's entirely a tempest in a teapot, a domestic argument, and it's all about Trump.
But Brazil, Marta, this has become the most political of political topics, right?
And I think the press has played a nice and welcome role balancing the political discussion. First, they took for themselves the role of educating the population, and I think they're doing a fine job. And they are trying to escape and being rational and bring some rationality to this so highly politicized environment. And if you take into consideration, many of the reporters are home officing. The press, the Brazilian press, scientific press, was very reduced, I would say. Healthcare journalists, the ones we used to have like 10 years ago, very specialized, they are not so much. And they are covering and studying and, making the most of it and delivering a very good, work, in my opinion. Also, I would say the companies and the authorities, like the companies have been very sensitive. They adopted a very sensitive tone of voice, discreet, but they are doing a lot. And the press is covering those initiatives on their way, on their side. So I think collaboration is the what we see most of that, and the result is, the press is playing here a very important role.
Which is encouraging, because the Brazilian press is usually pretty partisan politically, right? It's politically a bit like much of Europe. You don't have any doubts about which side, which outlet is on under normal circumstances.
And in the past, like 3-4 years, that has gone even, more clear division. The press is very divided, but when the subject is coronavirus, though they may give space to hydrochloroquine, they will listen to the specialists and publish, a balanced result. So I think they're doing great.
How has the Spanish media responded? And again, can you think of particularly good or particularly discouraging examples?
Yeah, I could highlight as a good job the one El País is doing. They have a specific website just for coronavirus. It calls Coronavirus Crisis. People can ask anything they want or anything they see they have to ask. Also, they just saw every single map and with every single graphic of the worldwide, so you can see how the coronavirus is evolving in each country with all the data, all the analysis. They have podcasts every day, but Spain is very political in the press, and really right now there are a lot of tensions between the government and the opposite party. And every single decision that the government has taken regarding coronavirus, the opposite party hasn't agreed with any. And some of the media have, tried to use the sensationalism and use some adjectives, images in the front pages that has created a little bit more, division in the people. So sometimes people are more focused on, if the government has taken the good decision or not, because the opposite party hasn't agreed, than, if it's really important to take the decision or not.
So Raquel, thinking though about the Spanish news coverage in general, have they got the science right? If they're making it fairly political, albeit that it's polarized, have they by and large got it factually correct, or has it been touch and go?
I mean, as I say, if you go to El País, RTV, they have amazing data analysis, science, but you need to be careful with some news with sensationalism. I have one example that it horrifies me when I saw. There are a lot of fake news in social media, and you can think, the fake news are in social media and they are it's quite difficult to control in social media, but the worst thing is when those fake news are coming into the general media, and that happened in Spain.
Aman, India, as in all things, India puts us to shame. 400 24-hour TV news channels, plus a thriving press. Overall, are there examples of really good and really bad in Indian media coverage?
The depth and the spread of the media in India is quite humongous. But I think if you look at the media per se in India, it has done a journey. So from the initial days when they got people who do not really knew health, they have started to really do a good job of reporting on this subject. And what they have really done is that they did realize that they do not have an expertise in-house. So they started to bring in a lot of experts to talk through, and they are asking the relevant questions. So I think the broadcast took some time, but they have started, to get their act together. And then you have the usual suspects, people who have been writing on the health and science for years. And these are the print media guys who people look up to. And I think just the fact that India we are at a very early stage of pandemic, keeping in mind the population which we have. And the government has been quite active in briefing the media. So there's a daily press briefing, which the Ministry of Health does. So, certain aspects of information comes out. Having said that, there have been incidences where a certain religious groups or the religious faith-based aspects started to come up. So we had a particular group which really held a large mass gathering, and a lot of positive cases have emerged from that one particular group. And there was a kind of a lot of media in a certain section looking at that particular religious community to be at the forefront of really spreading and then trying to cut or divide the society on those lines, which I thought was very insensitive. One of the channels talked that the government is going to run some special trains to take the migrant workers, because that was one big issue. You have a lot of migrant workers who wanted to go back to their villages, and after the lockdown, that was not happening. So there was a particular news which ran on a sort of media in a state level, and we had thousands of people sort of coming to the train station in that. And then it did got a little politicized at the state level to say who really was behind it. Overall, they have been doing a decent job. The broadcast media has got their act together, and I believe they might sort of, back in reckoning to be one of the main media horses in the coming months.
Yes, and I want to come back to your point about science writers, because I think when we talk about how things will be different going forward, that may be one of the examples. But just to stick for a minute with this idea of unity and division in the way that the media have reported the epidemic, I think we've seen some really stark examples of the politicization of this pandemic in a way I can't remember a health issue being politicized in the past. And I mean, in India, it's been around the figure of the Prime Minister and around his reaction to it. Maybe though yours has been more muted than most of the rest.
Yeah, and I think it's largely just because the current Prime Minister has been very structured in his way of using the media. Keeping 1.3 billion people under the lockdown and that to the Indians is not an easy task. Despite having initial hiccups where people questioned the fact that there was no coordination between state and the center or across the different layers of the administrative staff, we haven't really seen, kind of a political divide. And I think states again has come around to sort of really focus on the pandemic.
Marta, we've had this extraordinary situation in the past week where President Bolsonaro was asked about 6,000 deaths and appeared to reply, "So what?" Is that right?
Our president has been elected by the Washington Post 2 weeks ago as the worst world leader during the pandemic. And yes, it's true. When we reached 3 days ago 6,000 deaths, our president, whose middle name is Messiah, he returned to the journalists saying, "So what? I'm Messiah, but I'm not doing any miracles." He has been behaving in a way nobody can understand. We have good examples on authorities, because the state authorities are doing a very sensible and balanced job educating the population with daily briefings and explaining all the measures and standing up against all the state governors, standing up against the president.
Even those state governors who come from the president's former party?
Not many are in this situation. Nobody knows what's going to happen in the future with him.
In some ways, this is a more extreme version of at least a narrative that's been going on in the United States. The president appearing to sound as if he wants to reopen the country. Most of the governors appearing as if they want to continue the lockdown, with notable exceptions, of course. I mean, do you hear echoes of this in the US?
Absolutely. I would say that is now the main, hydroxychloroquine is old news, sort of. The main thing now is the argument over when to reopen, how to reopen. There's already been protests, as you may have seen, in Michigan and other states. In California, they're protesting to reopen the beaches. I think it's in the front of everyone's mind, and I think it really illustrates, it's a good microcosm of the sort of the problem that's facing us. It is a problem of knowledge in an emerging and evolving situation, and a problem of authority and trust. Because the news media is partisan, there's now no longer a forum where you can have what we need, which is a rational, calm, scientific discussion using what we know now, the state of our knowledge now, about when it's going to be safe to reopen. But there isn't any of that. It's just sound and fury. And so ordinary people like myself, are kind of left in the middle, and we have nowhere to trust. When half the country reflexively distrust Donald Trump and everything he says. The other half reflexively distrust the news media, and not just them, but the scientific establishment as well. That's something that's new. To say that the doctors and the scientists are politicized too, and the fact that they may actually well be, is very frightening.
And Raquel, my impression is that things have been remarkably unpoliticized in Spain, actually in most of Europe.
In Spain, I would say it still is very political, everything. But I have to say the media has been doing a really good job trying to inform of what they need to do, like Marta say, educating. So basically right now, they need to come back to the new normality. They say new normality. Some media were criticizing that, or other media not, but in general, I would say the proper media were doing a good job, and they were giving all the information of how they need to do it, even with graphics, when the old people need to go out, at what time, when the kids can go out, when the people can go to do some sport, and then in the second phase again, in the next phase again. So I think they're doing really good job informing of that. And still, even if everything is a little bit politic, as you may know, Spain is divided in autonomous communities. So, for example, health systems, there are 17 different health systems in Spain. And at the beginning of the pandemic, the government needed to take over control of the health system and do it general, because if not, it could be impossible to, And then now also is the question of how this is, when it's coming back to the governments in the autonomous communities, when the health system is going to be again on their control, how this is going to evolve, and it's quite difficult as well there.
Let's come on to our last topic. I can't help thinking that health reporting is going to be changed for a long time by this. There's been routine discussion on every news program and every newspaper about the difference between antigen and antibody testing. There's been discussion of how long immunity is going to last. There's been discussion of the different phases of vaccine testing, the complexity of vaccine manufacture. All of these would have been inconceivable 6 months ago. So it seems to me that we're going to have a different kind of discussion of health for at least a little while, and maybe for a long while after this. How does it seem to you? Let me start with you, Arman.
There will be a change, and there will be a larger focus and investment in healthcare and the science writing across media. And what we see currently, the science writers, which we have the current crop, is kind of an extension of what happened in the 90s and early 2000, when the HIV/AIDS epidemic was spreading and the media took upon themselves to talk about it. There was a larger focus on the subject. So I think there will be another crop of new set of journalists who will emerge out of this pandemic, who would be passionate, who would be knowledgeable, and who would really like to do some really nice and in-depth science-led stories. And I think the media also would realize that there is a space and there is an interest among their audience on this subject. I think the government, the multilateral, bilateral foundation, and the funds who will again get active in this space, and medical devices, pharma, health tech, these are the industry which will start to grow. And as they start to grow, they would look at certain kind of partnership and alliances with the media to educate their target audience. So there's going to be an investment in this line, and I'm sure media will look at how to really find this opportunity to continue on this. The kind of reporting might change. They may look at role of technology, digital health, so on and so forth. But for a while, COVID-19 will remain at the center of the conversation. Everything will be floating around it. And as the things move, more and more people will continue to sort of look at what health can really do for the society and how health and technologies can sort of work together. So that's what I envision will happen.
Eric, I get the impression, again, watching from afar, but have those outlets which have kept up the level of health reports, do you think they've actually been able to establish any competitive advantage in this pandemic? I
would like to agree, and I think to some degree, yes. The ones that kept their health reporting staff are doing a very, very good job. And that said, The fact is that, per my previous comment, I think we're in a crisis of authority and knowledge here. And a lot of the things that used to be considered undisputed are now disputable. And you don't have to have a great deal of medical expertise or any expertise to engage in that. If you have a direct connection with someone who is espousing a scientific view, but it's a scientific minority view, then you have you can put it on the news because someone believes that, and that's all that you really need at this point. But I think, yes, the ones that have that legacy health reporting have done very well, and I think that they've built their credibility to some point, at least with their target audience. The point is the other half that doesn't believe a word that they say.
And there was an alarming study this week which suggested that if a COVID vaccine were available today, 50% wouldn't take it themselves and 2/3 wouldn't give it to their children, which really does go to that point of a fundamental loss of faith in expert opinion.
You see the similar thing. It's a trend predating COVID. I mean, the anti-vax movement, it has a similar manifestation.
So your view is the pandemic probably won't change much. It requires a deeper cultural change for reporting of health to change in the future.
I think so. I mean, I wish it weren't the case. It stands to reason that people should be interested in health news and that they should want more health news. I just don't see it happening because it's mostly a partisan game in this country on both sides, and both sides are contributing to it. If that changed, then yeah, we might be able to restore like a basis of authority and credibility, but I just don't see it happening right now.
Marta, Brazil.
Oh yes, I see a change. I really think that, as I said before, the journalists have done a great job filling the gaps of information they didn't have, but they went after, they listened to the specialists. First, I think the media in general got back to a role of trust. I also see that the media here in Brazil, they did so many debates and live transmissions and, created a very sensible debate. So I think this is a very positive role that will last. Also the use of technology and new formats. I think this is something that has come to stay. And in general, I would say that we got used to consulting scientists. This is a new role for specialists as well. They became popular.
My sense, Raquel, in Europe, we've seen traditional news sources re-establish themselves as the most trusted and the most important sources of information in this pandemic, in a way that I don't think was guaranteed to have happened.
Actually, yes, they have done a really good job. They already had probably the specialist journalists to do it. And as Marta said, the ones who didn't have it, they have gone into the experts. So I think the journalists have been filling the gaps.
This has been an absolutely fascinating discussion. So I'm really grateful to all of you. Eric, Marta, Aman, Raquel, thank you very much. We have to turn to Kieran Watts, who's with me here in Wales. And Kieran, as always, gives us a little update on media statistics and what the media are doing and how stories are or are not trending. Kieran.
It's actually quite unusual what we're doing this week, because we normally look at a specific topic or a series of topics and how they're viewed in different countries. But today we're actually looking at a specific country and how that country's situation with coronavirus and perhaps its response is being viewed around the world. And so we chose the US itself to look to assess the favourability, unfavourability ratio in traditional media coverage. And then we also looked at the three countries with the highest burdens of COVID-19 after the US, which in order are Spain, Italy and the UK. And then we wanted to look at two countries from South America and one from Asia, both of which have imposed whole-scale lockdowns, and those are India and Argentina. Now, interestingly, it is the US and Italy that have the highest favourability rating of the US, how it's handling the situation. But even then, the coverage is overwhelmingly negative. It's about a 2/3 negative, 1/3 coverage in both countries, slightly more favourable in the US than in Italy. In the UK and India, the coverage is roughly 75% negative compared to 25% favourable. In Spain, the coverage is slightly more unfavourable as compared to the UK and India. But the country far and away that is most overwhelmingly negative of the countries that we assessed is actually Argentina. And I think that the trend that we can draw from that is that actually it doesn't really matter whether a country is in lockdown or not, because all of the countries that we've looked at are in quite restrictive responses, whereas in the US it's quite fragmented. And on social media, again, overwhelmingly negative. It's an interesting snapshot of the global response. I think that this acts as kind of a microcosm of the divisions that we're seeing, and we can only hope that going forward the coverage is more unifying. Thank you, Mark.
Lovely. Thanks, Kieran. Those graphs that Kieran shows us are always fascinating. Of course, you can download the graphs as well from Health Issues India. So, thank you very much. Join us next week on Pandemic Cast, where we plan to look at the reaction to the vast pledging conference planned for Monday the 4th, where there's going to be a pledging of at least $8 billion to research and development in medicines, vaccines, and diagnostics. So that's our plan for next week, but things are so fast changing, we may have our plans disrupted. In any case, we look forward to seeing you then. And thank you again to all of my guests.